There are two words that you might have heard a lot lately: food insecurity. What is food insecurity and why should you care? Well, food insecurity is when people do not have adequate physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious foods that meet their dietary needs and preferences for an active and healthy life. That's according to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Today on Tech into the Future, we'll dive into the heart of a crisis that is gripping Nigeria and reverberating across the globe: food insecurity. According to the IMF, on average, Africans spend almost half of their income on food. Sadly, millions of Nigerians are currently grappling with hunger, a crisis aggravated by the devaluation of the naira, the cost of importation, fractures in Nigeria's agricultural food chain, and global conflicts. Amidst these dire challenges, we take a look at how innovators are trying to use technology to reshape the landscape of agriculture in Nigeria. Stay tuned as we explore the Agritech landscape and examine how we as a nation can forge new pathways for sustainable food production. Hello and welcome to Tech into the Future, where we talk about everything that's happening in tech and how it affects you. My name is Tomiwa Ladikomo. I'm the CEO of Tech Cabal, a digital publication that's been covering African tech for the last decade.
And I am Ngozi Maduka-Dozie. I look after Android partnerships for West Africa at Google. Alongside Tomiwa, I will be your guide into the world of technology in Nigeria, Africa, and the world. So, the rising price of food. I think I'm going to go on a diet, and I think it's a mandatory diet because...
It's not about weight. It's not about looking good.
It's about life, right?
It's about life.
And the truth of the matter is that if you look at the pyramid, and when we talk about the population, if you're feeling it in a certain belt, then that means everybody is feeling it. And I think we can see from a lot of the banter, not just on social media, but on the ground, right? Everybody is complaining. You go to the grocery store, you go to the supermarket, you go to the market itself, and the numbers have risen astronomically.
Yeah, I think it's really challenging and it's worrying. A few years ago, we started talking about sachetization, where the producers of food on the go were making their product into smaller sachet sizes.
Yeah.
And then you think about how difficult this year is, and you wonder, how much smaller can the sachets get?
Indeed.
How many fewer pieces of biscuit can you fit inside the packet?
Inside one sachet, yeah.
And you think about that into everything across sort of essential foods, and so the price of rice has risen, the price of yam has risen, the price of tomatoes has risen. Everything. And then you think, well, how are people sort of doing on a day-to-day basis?
And I think for me, what adds to the worry is that it's not just imported goods, right? It's goods that are grown here. And so, and I know we'll talk about this at different levels, that when you talk about 212 million mouths to feed, then I start asking myself, well, are we producing enough, right, in the first place, before we even get to the type of year you've been having, like the harvesting as an example, or distribution, you know what I mean?
Or just security.
Exactly.
And security affects a lot. It affects actually, can the goods get transported from
point A
where
to
they've
point
been
B,
produced to
where
the markets, and then from the markets to markets in the north, or markets in different sort of production areas,
right,
to end user markets.
Right.
And I think that's been getting worse. Across Nigeria, there are a number of sort of long-term problems with our food chains. So we don't have enough storage.
Yep.
We don't have enough sort of proper transportation. So we're still transporting everything via roads.
I think you said storage. I think we should start with production.
So production. So have you produced enough? Have you produced enough?
Yes.
To store?
Yes.
After you've stored it,
yes.
if you've figured out how to store it, then can it get to its destination quickly before it goes bad? The roads, the state of the road networks across the country. We've been investing in rail. We've invested in commuter rail rather than cargo.
Right.
And so we've not really built the most robust agricultural ecosystem and food value chain
And then by the time it then gets to the consumer, the question is, then how much would it have cost me? And then how much would I have to charge so that I can recoup and start it all over again?
Yeah. It's a really, really challenging period. And I think that I'm excited about talking about the ways in which some of that might be ameliorated by technology.
Indeed.
We're going to have a conversation around the various elements of that food chain where there might be interventions possible to improve the outcomes that we see.
And I think the more elements there are in the value chain, the more opportunity for tech to actually play a role. So yes, I am excited to see what those are. And I think it's also good to bring that to awareness of everyone, especially the viewers, because I wouldn't know, right? If I'm just sitting on my table, I want eggs, I may not understand what that value chain is and what all the entry points are and what the opportunities within Agritech, as we call this segment, the agriculture and tech infusion, right?
Yes. No, absolutely. There is, I think, a fascinating opportunity to improve conditions in there, but I will bring us to a point that we made on our last episode in our conversation with Oluwafunto, which is there are some fundamentals that you will always have to fix.
Yes.
Technology may make things better in certain spaces, but there are fundamentals that must always be fixed.
Yes, indeed.
You're watching Tech into the Future. Stay with us as we go to break. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Tech into the Future on Arise News. Our guest this week is Oluwafunto Olasemo, the Vice President of Financial Market at AFEX. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Okay, so before we start, let's at least agree that we're all on the same page to say, are we in agreement that there is a food crisis in Nigeria?
Absolutely. So I was telling one of my colleagues very recently that everybody has been served breakfast. It's just the degree of intensity of the breakfast that varies from one person to another. Because even if you ask the business moguls, they will tell you business is seriously impacted. Either cost of production has gone up because of cost of procurement of raw materials and all of that. So yes, we are in a crisis as a nation, and more specifically, yes, we do have food crisis issue in the country.
According to a recent report by the National Bureau of Statistics, our food inflation rate hit 35.4%. That's against 24.3% last year. Meantime, according to Tech Cabal, 56% of every naira earned is spent on food. How do we get food inflation under control? I mean, from your perspective, are there factors, are there things that we can do to really sort of bring this down?
I mean, again, looking at inflation generally, whether you're looking at the headline inflation or you're looking at food inflation, which essentially the food inflation is pulling the headline inflation, you would realize that there are so many things that are driving these things up, and to bring them down, there are things that need to be in place that are not in place. For starters, if you look at net food balance, we are negative, meaning we produce less than we consume. A lot of this difference then comes in through importation. And if we look at where the dollar and all the forex are, it's even very difficult to get importation into the country. So for us as a nation, looking at the landscape of our production of food coming into play, we are a smallholder agricultural ecosystem. With two, we produce less than we consume, and meaning there's a gap in that. And three, is there a lot of infrastructural gap and deficit that is supposed to improve production. From a statistics perspective, our population is growing at around 3%, right? And our level of food production is growing at about 2%, meaning that we're growing faster than the food we're producing. It also ultimately means that we are heading towards a crisis if nothing is done. So how do we bring them under control is what are first and foremost the factors that we need to put in place to improve production, which is access to quality input for the farmers, right? 2 is access to market. 3 is minimizing the post-harvest losses, which is access to storage, right? At the moment, everything we produce, depending on whose statistics you're looking at, we lose between 40 to 60% to post-harvest losses. So one, we're not producing enough. Two, what we're even producing, we're losing almost 50%. Yes. So again, we need to look at those building blocks in place that can improve the productivity of the country. So at least at the minimum, let's even be at the same level at which our population is growing.
I like that. Okay, so I know we always look at it from the global, everybody has some level, let's say globally, there is a food crisis, so to say. In our specific market, it's one thing for us to look internally and just say, well, here are some of the things when you look at the value chain, like you've already mentioned, just our production to storage, etc. To what extent do you think the wars in both Ukraine and Russia have played any impact on the food production and distribution in Nigeria?
I mean, when the war between Russia and Ukraine started, that was when the entire universe realized that 15% of the global calories sit between this country. And the world didn't really realize how much they hold everybody breakfast or lunch at their own disposal, right? And now the war happened. So what are the things that are critical to this country that drives production across the globe? Fertilizers. So again, we saw that at the onset of the war, there was a very sporadic increase in price of commodities like wheat. There was also extremely high increase in prices of fertilizers. Fertilizer pre the war was around 8,000 per bag, went to at some point 24,000 per bag, literally 2 to 3x of the value. And because again, we're a small, older community, and I talked about the level of productivity. Increasing the level of productivity means putting in more fertilizer into the ground to improve what you're producing per hectares of farmland. So part of the impact was that, number one, from a supply distribution perspective, it disrupted the global supply distribution of foods. For one thing, it was positive for countries that were prepared and were producing enough, because what that then meant is that they had enough to circulate within their system. On the other hand, it also helped the big processors rethink their supply chain strategy and began to look inward to say, how can we improve productivity at home instead of having just dependent solely on the import. So summary is that the onset of the war did disrupt the global food chain supply. It did impact the costs of the basic commodities, whether it's the fertilizer, which serves as input to production, energy, and all of those stuff. However, for some part of the world, they've recovered. Right. Because the world is how many years now? Gaza and Israel had the people on the table. But it just seems like because we really never had a structure in place that consistently improve our productivity as a nation, it seems like we are still held back in those effects of the Russian-Ukraine war.
Now, you've used this terminology. I just want to break it down for our viewer. You said smallholder. Farmers. Yeah. Just again, for the benefit of our viewers, what does that mean? So
there's a standard by which you define who a commercial farmer is and who a smallholder farmer is. So from the definition, and this is a globally accepted definition, it's pretty much saying that if you're cultivating a farmland that is less than 10 hectares of farmland, then you're a smallholder farmer. So if you're doing above 10 hectares, then you're not a smallholder farmer. The average acreage that most farmers do in Nigeria is between 1 to 5 hectares of farmland. Depending on the commodity that is being produced, 1 hectare of, say, farmland for maize will give you about 4 metric tons, right? So if you're doing 5 hectares of maize, you're doing 20. So a lot of people doing 5 in fact, even though they are saying they are smallholder farmers, they are like kings of smallholder farmers, right? And if we then put it in context of what we consume, right? Looking across the staple crop of maize, sorghum, soybean, and paddy rice, we have a combined consumption, again, depending on whose data you're looking at, between 25 to 30 million metric tons. And the combined production is about 20 million metric tons. Right. So again, imagine the number of smallholder farmers you need to put together, right, to do that. Yes. And these are people that are just doing normal farming, not improving, not using any form of technological advancement to improve the level of yield.
So let me ask a question. You're a commodity board and
commodity
this is exchange.
Yeah.
Apologies, exchange. And agriculture is big money on a global basis. Why
Yeah.
don't we have more large-scale commercial farming in Nigeria?
So a number of things. Number one, if you see the way we've practiced agriculture, so it's again going back historically to how this thing come. There's the issue of the people that are doing farming. It has always been seen as a way of life rather than a business or a commercial viable activity. That's one. On the other hand, there's also the issue of land ownership. Right, all the farmers, again, very good number of the farmers have this land been in their family for years. So it is almost impossible for you as a commercial to say you want to do commercial farming without having to maybe go to a dedicated forest and having to clear that space, how to create that. So there's the issue, a big challenge around land ownership. Right, and because of, again, our cultural belief and sentiment attached to land and belief system, someone could literally think that if they give up their land, their ancestors will come after them and inflict the entire community. So one of the reasons we've really not transitioned, one is issue of land ownership. Two is also the standard of living of the farmers, right? Again, I did mention that level of productivity is low. These guys are smallholder farmers. They don't have access to credit because who is a farmer? Who knows a farmer? It doesn't even have, for a lot of people, they don't even have means of identity. Second is access to market. They sell to middlemen and farm gate. They really do not know the Nestle and the big boys that are buying, who are aggregating and buying them, right? So, and three is access to storage. They produce more than 50% of what they produce is get to spoilage, and then half of what they produce, they have to eat for themselves to sustain to the next season. So because the issues around these three core issues are not being solved, the farmer just begins to go from one level of poverty to the another. So they never really get out of that poverty cycle. And then because they can't get out, their productivity is not improved. They can't hope to do more. Right, and which is part of the challenges that as AFEX as an entity is trying to solve.
So Agritech is a growing niche, right, within the tech space in Nigeria. From your experience and observation, how has technology impacted the agricultural landscape so far, and where do you believe the opportunities lie?
Okay, so I think from my perspective, I'm going to come at it at a different and unconventional approach.
Yes, that's
because
what we want.
A lot of time when people say agri-tech and technology around agriculture, they tend to point it towards the direction of the way you do farming, as saying you're not doing soilless agriculture and you're not doing this kind of technology and all those. And I tell them that, first and foremost, you need to realize that there's about 74 million hectares of farmland in Nigeria. Right, less than 50% of that is being cultivated. Less than 2% of what is being cultivated is being irrigated. Right, meaning that even from an optimization of land, we've not even scratched the surface. So why are you trying to do soilless when you've not even optimized for soil?
Fair enough.
Right. So for me, I would then like to say that when you talk of agri-tech or technology in agriculture, I like to look at it from a data perspective. Right, because data is critical. So one of the reasons why across board for all the stakeholders within the value chain have not been able to effectively address all the issue is about data availability. Right, there's data availability. What are we producing? Who is producing what? Right, who is buying what? At a very generic, we have very, very generic numbers, right? But again, this data, your data is different from my data. So there's data availability, there's data asymmetry, right? Someone comes to say today we're producing 10 million metric tons. And so someone comes and says, no, it's 23 million metric tons. So there's data availability, there's data asymmetry. There's also data transmission and data interpretation, right? So the guys that are producing, do they have access to this data? Do they have access to what the value of commodity is? Do they have access to rainfall information around weather and the rest of them, right? So for me, it's looking at, those are very basic challenges that affects productivity that I feel like, let's solve for that first, rather than thinking of soilless agriculture. So ability to say, you know what, can we leverage on technology to be able to harness data? First and foremost, so we know where we truly are as a nation. And then we're able to say this is what is missing, because data would inform policy, right? Data will inform investment. If a DFI want to come into the ecosystem and say, you know what, I want to allow Nigerians or farmers to be able to produce all year round? Where does it get the data from in terms of irrigation system within the country? So for me, I look at involvement of, again, summary is, I look at involvement of technology in agriculture from a very fundamental and basic, which is data, right? How do we leverage on technology and use data, right, to provide the information to all the stakeholders so people begin to take the necessary action? And which is, again, where the exchange comes in to say there's price discovery on the exchange. You know what is being sold, how much is being sold. I can decide to hold and sell at a future.
You've already mentioned AFEX and the exchange, so let's lay it out for the audience. What is AFEX and how does it work?
So AFEX is, I would say that, and I'll try to answer that question from a 5-year-old perspective, because I do have 2 girls, and one time one of them did ask me that, what is AFEX and what do you do mommy, what do you do at AFEX? And the way, it actually took me a while to think about it, because really I'm
glad you have practice, because I'm not too smart like that, so please keep it at the pilot.
I get to deal with fund managers, financial market institutions, and I was like, okay, how do I break this thing? And it also got me thinking to say, how do I explain the value of AFEX to the layman on the street? First and foremost, at AFEX, we do believe that we can help Africa feed itself. Right. And for Africa to feed itself, it means that there are things that needs to move from one side of the value chain to the other side of the value chain. So at AFEX, our mission is to create an efficient system that allows for commodities trading in Africa. And we want to be that reference point for commodities in Africa. And to a 5-year-old, what AFEX does is essentially trying to create shared prosperity across everybody working within the value chain by making the farmers richer, more productive, and also making individuals, investors richer and create a new generation of wealth.
Interesting. I'm not, as a 5-year-old, I wonder if I'm clear.
I was going to say, are you clear? So let's see if we can break that down a little further, right? If I'm a farmer, right, what does AFEX do for me? I'm a farmer, and forget even my background, right? It doesn't matter what commodity it is that I'm farming. What can I say? If I had to tell somebody tomorrow, you know what, you're a farmer, here's the contact of this organization.
So as a farmer, I would say AFEX provide you access to market, meaning that everything you produce, you have a place where you can literally guarantee a ready offtake because there are buyers on the other side. 2 is AFEX provide you access to credit, which means that AFEX is seeing you as, not seeing you as a farmer, but seeing you as a customer that has financial needs, meaning you need access to credit. You have school fees to pay, you have goods to transact in. So AFEX provide you that access to credit for you to be able to take credit and improve your productivity, right? And then the third part is AFEX give you access to storage infrastructure, meaning I have produced, rather than doing my traditional and crude way of storage, I have ability to store and hold to when I want to sell. So summary is, for a farmer, we try to solve that value chain problem for the farmer, which is, again, summarized in 3 forms: access to market, access to credit, access to infrastructure.
Fantastic.
What role does tech play in your work?
I mean, tech is very critical. I had more than 75% of my career working in a technology company, so I kind of love technology. I would say, if I take it from the very basic, right, and again, looking at the most important players in the ecosystem, which are the smallholder, I consider them the most important players, because if they don't produce, then every other thing within the value chain doesn't work, right? Nobody has something to aggregate, nobody has something to buy, nobody has something to produce, and then we would ultimately not have food on the table. So if I look at the role of technology, number one is technology allowed us at AFEX to bring the smallholder within the value chain, because these guys were excluded completely from the value chain. They were just people in the rural area just cultivating. For most of the areas where we have AFEX operation, when we started out a few years ago, they were the farmers that were within our register. that was the first time they ever had any financial footprint or had any form of identity. So technology had played a role for us in creating inclusion into the value chain for the smallholder farmers. Now, if I then go further above the value chain to the aggregators and the investors, again, because we are now having these guys within the ecosystem, we are now sitting on data. Right, sitting on data across the key production states. Right now, people are now saying there's data around what is being produced, and there's also price discovery to say if this is being produced and I want to buy. There's a willing buyer, there's a willing seller. What is that sweet spot where the transaction get consummated? So there's that part of creating price discovery, leveraging on technology to provide price discovery. Now, the more advanced part of it is then saying, how do you then leverage technology to improve value? Then you can then begin to go into other things of traceability, sustainability, and climate, depending on which school of thought. But again, we won't go too very deep into that. Technology has critical role in, again, bringing people within the value chain. Two is creating that data that people can then use to take informed decision on what and how they want to play within the ecosystem.
Fantastic. So last month, AFEX published a review and outlook report for 2024. Tell our viewers and us first of all, where they can get this report and some of the nuggets that we can expect to see.
So first and foremost, if you go to our website, African Exchange, we have a segment there where you can download the annual COP report, and it's something we do every year to pretty much show to the entire nation survey that we've done around who produced what do we expect, and then we can begin to know whether price of egg is going to move from 3,500 to whatever
4,000.
So again, it's the crop production report is really key, and is a big part of what we do at AFEX. In terms of what they should look, or what the report essentially is speaking to, is pretty much speaking to trying to have a population where you can then take inference in terms of what level of production we should be looking at, what commodity were produced in the year, and then where do we might see price spikes due to either what's it called now? Due to either deficit in production from previous year and supply like that. So essentially, that is what the crop production report tends to do.
See, our time is almost well spent, but I can't let you go without asking you one fundamental question.
Yeah.
What role would you like to see the government play in this?
I mean, for me, it's whether Nigeria or anywhere, governments are enablers, right? And I don't think anything about that has changed or would change within the context of the Nigerian ecosystem. The government are again trying all they could. At least we've seen a number of efforts, particularly around this food security system. The federal government coming to say, okay, we want to try and nip this in the bud. We've seen a few state governments saying, okay, at the state level, we also want to do a few things. For me, what we would like to see government do is, again, the policy that enables and improve productivity at the very basic level, right? That is very important. And why I say that is, in every economy, the government is the biggest spender, right? The next biggest spender, I work within the financial market space, so the next biggest spender is either the bank or the pension fund, depending on whose, again, data you're looking, depending on whose data you're looking at, right? And a lot of time, across the globe, the biggest spender face the direction of the government. If the government says they are facing this direction policy-wise, all the money bags face that direction. So as far as productivity is concerned, there has to be very clear roadmap from the government in terms of between this time and this time, we want to improve our productivity, and this is what the ultimate outcome should be. And then get all the stakeholders who are very hands-on in doing this, because there's no point doing policies that does not involve the stakeholders. Get the stakeholders who have skin in the game to be contributors towards that policy. Because at the end of the day, not every one of us will jackpot. Some of us are past the age where, where we can have age as an advantage to migrate. So again, it is very critical. Government are doing their best, but it is even more very critical for them to be very intentional about the policies they push within the sectors, getting the the key stakeholders who have skin in the game to be part of that policy, and then ensure that it doesn't just stop at the level of policy. They see those policies through to implementation, because it really is in the implementation that the results comes
in. Indeed, very true.
Excellent. Stay with us on Tech into the Future. We'll be right back after this break.
Welcome back to Tech into the Future. We just had quite an interesting interview with Funto from AFEX. Yeah. So, several things. There is food insecurity in Nigeria, just in case anyone missed it. And there are some very fundamental reasons why we have food insecurity outside of what's going on globally, right? I think for me, the key takeaways I think we already know this, right? Is that first of all, we're not producing clearly nearly enough. I think one of the things that fascinated me was that even what we're producing, over 50% of that gets lost in either lack of adequate storage, or they're stolen, or the transportation. Yeah. So that's also that I didn't realize. I think what is interesting to me is the vast opportunity. So it's not surprising that we're not producing enough when you consider that majority of the farmers in Nigeria are what they call smallholder farmers, which, if you missed the interview, it means that those farmers don't have up to 10 hectares of farmland. Yeah. In fact, so if you consider that, and then you consider the fact that we don't have enough farmers, and the farmers that we have don't have enough land to farm on, and they're not. I don't want to say that they're farming for sustenance. They're farming for themselves. They're not farming for 212 million people.
I think what was interesting about the way she phrased it was they're moving from one level of poverty to another.
Yes.
So you have, as with many things in Nigeria, there's a key and core productivity problem here, which is they're not producing enough to escape to the next level. So they're not producing enough, they're not productive enough where they're saving enough, they're feeding themselves, they're going to the markets, they're maximizing their yields. So year on year, they can increase the size of their farms and increase the productivity of their land. Instead, they're barely breaking even year on year. She didn't speak too much to this, but I thought the more interesting problem is that we don't have more commercial farmers. And she spoke a little bit about some of the reasons for that, being land and our kind of traditions around land, our traditions around sort of farming habits. But for me, when I look at the more developed markets of the world, large-scale farming, which might not employ a lot of people, but will feed a lot of people, is really, really big business. And I think it was interesting speaking to an exchange where it's their job to say, look how much money there is in sorghum, look how much money there is in wheat, look how much money there is in rice. And you would think that the commercial opportunity to do this on a larger scale would be attracting funding in a more robust manner than it is right now. That, to me, seems an interesting part of the puzzle.
So perhaps we should look at that report.
Perhaps we should.
Maybe that report might give us some of this information. What she did mention, however, is the vast opportunity that exists, right? If there is 74 million hectares of farmland available in Nigeria, and only 50% of that is actually used for farming, and only 2% of that
is being irrigated.
Then I think I want to go into irrigation. I feel like there might be opportunity there. But yes, I think that what it does show is that there is opportunity in agri. But you do raise a good question and say, well, if this opportunity exists, why isn't there more investment?
And you know the interesting
answer.
Oh, bring it on.
Data.
Yes. She did point that.
She did point that out. So the truth of the matter is that if I want to invest in anything, I need to know, well, what are the opportunities there, not just in terms of the raw materials, but how much money can I make, right? And I think that's what we don't have access to. And I think she talks about data availability, data asymmetry, data transmission, data interpretation. And then, the truth of the matter is that data would help inform policy, and it would help create opportunities for investment.
Yes, absolutely. Just to wrap it up, I thought she mentioned sort of three sort of important areas in terms of where technology can affect sort of agricultural outcomes and improve them. So access to credit,
Yes.
access to market, access to storage. And I think that as we kind of continue on the show, we should speak to more people who are intervening in those spaces, whether it's access to credit, to market, to storage. And then on the production side, we should have more conversations. But all in all, a fascinating conversation around an issue that is pressing for life for many, many people.
You know one of the things she didn't mention? She didn't mention access to digital, right? So for instance, do I need to know if it's going to rain tomorrow? Do I need to know, what kind of soil is the best soil to plant, or when is the season? As opposed to just information is passed on through my dad is a farmer and this is how we did it, and so on and so forth. I do think that there might be something to be gained by including access to, do I want to say digital? But just like to the larger
digital
ecosystem.
Tools. It still ends up being access to data. It still
yes,
ends
so
up being
data.
access to data, and then digital is then how you're accessing it. Is it coming to you on your phone?
Fair enough.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to explore in that case, and I think we will continue to speak with other players in this space as we go on through the show.
As it continues to be a problem in Nigeria.
Yes, it is.
Thank you for joining us on Tech into the Future. Join us again next time as we take you into the business and impact of technology in Africa, how it's changing the world and how it's changing your world. Stay tuned for Arise News.